Hello and welcome to episode 8 of my mostly stock career. Today, we're starting off with this very strange looking craft here. Now, the purpose of this is to complete a contract, which was that Munar station contract that I had picked up last time. Or if I didn't pick it up, then I picked it up in between last episode and this episode. Anyway, it said get a station that can house 5 Kerbals in an orbit around the moon that has an antenna and can generate its own power. So I have a pretty simple station here. I literally just put the surface attachment pieces from the structural tab on the sides and then attached 4 crew cabins to them. And of course using the main crew cabin, which Jebediah is piloting to actually control the thing. That way I have crew capacity for 5, has solar panels for power, and it has an antenna, because we have, I believe, 2 variants, the regular kind of stick antenna, and then the other one that will fold out. And I believe I put the folding antenna on this, or 2 of them, to balance out, maybe. But this is just a standard orbit that we've seen countless times, so of course I'm going to go quickly through it. If anything different happens with an orbit that I feel as though is necessary to do the full thing, where I talk through it, then I will. Maybe for a very, very large rocket that has a not so great thrust to weight ratio or not so great drag profile, meaning it's like very broad, then I'll kind of slow it down to talk about it. But this one didn't really have any issues. It flew just like a normal rocket. Even though the command modules are on their sides, they're still circular, so they're still kind of aerodynamic. It's not like there are flat surfaces pointed up, which is generally how the Kerbal stock Kerbal Space Program drag system works, is it kind of reads off nodes. So if there's a node on top, and the node is facing the direction that you're heading, it will generate more drag than if there's not a node facing that direction. Which is why nose cones are actually really important now, because they don't have a node on top of them, they only have a node on bottom of them to connect them to something that has a node on top. But we get this thing to the moon, selected the periapsis on the encountered burn, and then of course I just try and circularize it semi-circular, and it's a decent equatorial orbit. It's not perfect, but it'll be fine for this contract. So we're just going to name this thing as the contracted Munar station and go back to the Space Center. Back at the Space Center, I actually upgrade the launch pad because I need to be able to house more mass. 140 tons is not enough for this next mission I'm planning, which is actually a Munar lander that's going to visit several biomes as to gather us lots of science, which is why I want Bob, who is a scientist, as my actual seated pilot, so that he'll basically increase our gain. And after a couple fine adjustments on this craft, a few more struts added, it's good to go. Now this one is the largest craft I've launched so far in this series, where it's actually using 2.5 meter tanks as the external kind of boosters. Of course, it's got a first solid rocket booster stage that's just helping it really have a high thrust to weight ratio early as to avoid taking too much gravitational effects. And then it's got these 3 giant fuel tanks because I needed to move this quite a large payload, which is of course the actual lander. Now the lander has about 2,500 units of Delta V in it because it's meant to go to several biomes on the moon. Now, if we were going to min-miss, 2,500 Delta V could probably get us to 7 or 8 biomes if we were efficient with it, because min-miss's gravity is so low. However, the moon's gravity is much higher, meaning we're only going to probably get... I'm planning for 3. However, I might only be able to do 2, or even if I'm efficient, I might do 4, but with the moon, I always seem to find bad landing spots, so it's very unlikely that I'll get any more than 3 out of this. Now, of course, I'm tweaking with the maneuver node a little bit, trying to get it so that my periapsis is very low around the moon. I'm also trying to set it up so that my periapsis crosses by the moon's south pole. And the reason I want it to cross by the moon's south pole is because the first biome I want to go to is the Munar poles, since I know that they're going to have a lot of science for us. And I know I haven't gone there, since I've only gone to one biome, which I believe was the Midlands. Going to the poles basically guarantees that I won't accidentally land in the same biome, which is something that I would not want to do, because then it'd kind of be a waste to go to the same biome twice. So of course I determined the best way to do this is actually wait until I'm out of my initial burn, so that I can just burn anti-normal to go down towards the south pole of the moon. And it appears to work, and I actually looks like I'm going to be getting to the south pole. However, I'm a little bit off with the actual landing. So my periapsis is low, and I could wait to go down, but it doesn't look like I'm going to hit the pole, so I try to redirect my trajectory to actually hit the pole by, of course, just slowing down a little bit or burning towards the planet, which redirects my trajectory. And now we are drifting towards the moon. But to be efficient, of course, I don't just drop the stage and prepare my landing stage. I'm actually going to use this big engine here to slow myself down a little bit before I drop it and let it crash to the moon. Now we've got these nice 3 big fuel tanks with 3 engines that are going to be our lander. And of course they have a much lower thrust-away ratio, but still a pretty good one, so we can decelerate rather quickly. Now what I'm doing here is I'm actually still burning against the horizon because I wanted to slow my horizontal velocity rather than my vertical velocity, so that way I could have a more accurate landing, because this place looked like a good landing site. It looked like one. That doesn't necessarily mean it is one, though. So as I'm coming down, I'm just keeping my velocity between about 20 and 30. I don't want to go too fast, but I also don't want to go too slowly, otherwise it's kind of inefficient. Technically the most efficient landing is called a suicide burn, where you literally burn the engine at the very last second, and you keep it burning until you touch down, where there's actually no gap in between, no like falling towards the planet like I'm doing. Now if you actually noticed what I did there is I rotated the craft so that my landing leg would be facing down on this slope. That way I would have basically more pressure on the downward facing part of the slope and decrease my chances of flipping over. So I was pretty happy that I was able to actually land here and not have to have the craft flip over, although I was paranoid that it would start any moment. So, speeding the video up, again we begin to gather all of our science, and there is a lot of science to gather. A materials bay junior, goo experiment, temperature data, pressure data, crew reports, EVA reports on the surface, and a surface sample. All of this data totals to be about 300 to 400 per landing site, meaning we're getting 300 to 400 science per landing site 3 times since we managed to do 3 landings. That is a lot of science, and we're going to be seeing just how much science and how surprised I am because I didn't realize how much I was actually gathering during this mission. Now once we've completed our first site there, we begin to move more south to actually go to the poles, and I do recognize that the moon's poles are these really awful jagged terrained areas, and that makes them rather difficult to land at. So what I notice is that a good landing site looks like that over there, so I begin to burn not only retrograde but also to make it so that I will move to the side as to try and land on this kind of plateau type thing. I don't know if you can really call it a plateau on the moon, but it looked flatter than any other bit of terrain, so I go to land here. Of course, same style, just slowly go down, keep burning to just gently touch the ground, and there we go. Another landing with the same craft, of course. Now, one thing to note at this point is if you're doing big missions like this where you're gathering lots of science with one craft, using the same engines and fuel tanks without refueling, as you go through the mission, such as this mission right here, you will use the fuel in the fuel tanks, but your engines will always have the same efficiency, meaning the mass of your craft decreases, but you still have the same thrust, meaning your thrust-to-weight ratio actually increases as time goes on, making it so that you can land more sharply, meaning that there's a less amount of time you have to spend burning, because of course your thrust-to-weight ratio goes up. Now I spent a little bit looking around the moon trying to find another biome that I wanted to go to, since I had already gotten 3 biomes and I got 2 biomes and I had wanted a third. So I had found what appeared to be a crater, which each crater, from what I understand, is that each crater is their own biome on the moon, so you can visit every single crater and get new science. And because I believe this, well, it made sense to go to a crater, and as it turns out, I was right. So every crater, at least the crater I visited in this one, has its own biome, so its own science, which means we get tons more data. Which, of course, this is the third mission we get, and I can tell that because we're really low on fuel, and I don't think we actually have enough fuel to do another mission, and even if we did, there'd be no way we'd ever get back. Now, of course, I gather all of the science again, and I'm actually at this point contemplating what I need to do to return. And I'm sure in this post-commentary, some of you have already realized something wrong with this craft, and its capability of returning to Kerbal. If you haven't, then you will notice very soon. Now, I do decide to actually go back to the Space Center first because I wanted to look at mission control to make sure that there were no new contracts I could grab, and there actually was one for space for science on the surface of the moon, which is incredibly convenient. So with another contract completed, we're back here and we're going to be bringing Bob home. Now, because I knew to get to this crater I had to travel along the 135 degrees on the nav ball, I think that traveling along the 135 degrees again will be a good idea. And I begin burning very, very low on the horizon, basically right on the horizon, just a little bit above though to avoid this mountain in front of me. And the reason I'm burning lower on the horizon is it's going to give me a better chance of getting out of the moon's sphere of influence and back into Kerbal. If I were to burn further up, then I would actually be burning towards the planet, or not really towards the planet, but less towards the planet, which would lead to me having absolutely no chance of getting back. So burning at this angle actually is a pretty good escape trajectory from the moon, and I'm actually really impressed that I'm able to get a return trajectory. I honestly didn't think I had enough liquid fuel for this, and as it turns out, I barely had enough. Like, I mean absolutely barely had enough. I'm less than 1 liquid fuel right now, and that just goes to show how pretty much spot on that was. Now, at this point, if you haven't noticed what's wrong with the craft, then you may actually begin to learn what's wrong with the craft. So, you will be seeing in a very moment about the time that I realized there was something wrong with this craft. Right as I staged it, right here in this very scene, I had noticed something about this craft that made it a little difficult to land. Got some solar panels, an SAS module, a probe core, and an antenna. We even have a heat shield on the bottom. As you can see right there, we got a heat shield, we have everything we need to land. Let me know when you figure it out. I'm almost certain this will go really well. There is absolutely nothing that can go wrong with this landing, don't you think? That there's not anything wrong with this craft. We'll slow down because we've got the heat shield to protect the crew capsule, keep Bob alive. And we just need to slow down. And I was actually thinking that we might slow down a little slowly because we had such a steep falling into Kerbal. But as it turned out, we slowed down quite effectively. All right, I'll just tell you guys now because I've been playing this too long. We have no parachutes. Now, I had realized this back in orbit when this was unchangeable. So I just went along with it, and I realized if I fall down at an angle, I actually fall slightly slower than if I went straight down. So I was just going to kind of play this out with Bob and see how it went. Maybe for some odd reason I'd be able to slow this craft down slow enough that this landing could go a little better than what I would expect it to. However, it went exactly as expected. There was nothing left of it. Poor Bob. Now, I've actually been playing you. I knew this thing didn't have any parachutes when I had launched it. I had never intended for it to come back on its own. So I quick saved before I even took off the moon. So you might be wondering, why might I waste your time with false killings of Bob on purpose? Or maybe you suspect that I'm lying and I really did mess up, but then why did I quick save if I actually messed up? Well, I have messed up in the past. I will admit that. I have accidentally killed Kerbals, and it has been very unfortunate, because it is not intended for me to kill any of these Kerbals, especially not the hero Kerbals. Now, the reason I did this is because I said in the beginning of this series that it's kind of directed towards newer players, where I'm actually going in real time quite a bit and talking about how to play the game, how to do certain things like get to orbit, how to align orbits, such as in the last episode. So I'm kind of going around trying to demonstrate this to a newer audience, and I'm trying to really emphasize the importance of quick saving, because more often than not you will find yourself in a scenario that you can't actually predict or control, such as you set yourself for a nice return trajectory to Kerbin just to realize you don't have any parachutes. And at the point of realizing this, there's nothing you can do to stop it. So all you have to do is go with it and let one of your hero Kerbals unfortunately die. So for new players, quick saving, I don't think quick saving is a cheat. Now certainly sometimes when I play career mode, if I play on hard difficulty, I'll disable quick saving, because it can be kind of cheaty because it lets you actually do the experiment before anything happens. So if it goes wrong, you can just go back and revert. But definitely for new players, use it, utilize it. You need to learn when you're playing this game how to actually control your craft, know what your craft does, and how to do things efficiently. So if you're doing a launch from the moon, such as the one I just did, then quick save before you take off and keep trying until you actually get the right angle. Same thing with a mod called Mech Jeb or Mechanical Jeb. It's basically an autopilot mod where it lets you do just about everything, as it'll do everything for you. It may not do it the most efficient way, but it will be able to do it for you. And if you're brand new to the game, I actually recommend using it. And the reason for that is because it will, like I said, it will rendezvous for you. It will dock for you. You can watch what it does and copy it, and then learn from it and do it more efficiently than the actual autopilot itself. Now, for experienced players, I don't think it's necessary, and once you actually know what you're doing, like you know how to get rendezvous and you know how to dock craft, you're going to find yourself not using it because you're going to think it's inefficient. But when I was brand new to Kerbal Space Program, I'd used it to help me learn how to get rendezvous, and now I can do rendezvous without an issue. So you can actually learn quite a bit from using the autopilot when you're a new player, and then you can choose whether or not you want to use it. I don't think it's a bad thing. I think it's really good for new players to actually be able to watch and learn what to do to actually complete some of the stuff it'll do for you, like landings and encounters. But we did manage to get Bob into a Munar orbit, which means it's time to go rescue him. So I've got, again, another small craft controlled by a probe, this time with a parachute, and it's going to be sent out to go pick up Bob. Now, there's a small issue with launch where it just kind of loses control for a second, and then there's never any more problems launching it. So we're just going to skip ahead to actually working on the encounter. Now, I was going to use this encounter originally to try and show you guys that you can do encounters into rendezvous, so you can get an encounter with the moon and then immediately rendezvous to a craft orbiting the moon. However, I did it very, very poorly, and it took me about an hour to actually do because I was just messing around with maneuver nodes so extensively. So I'm going to skip over it and actually do that in a different video when we dock something to the lunar station we have in an equatorial orbit. But as you can see, I just mess around with this maneuver node quite excessively. And after using a lot more fuel than I had expected to need to use for this encounter, I do actually manage to finally get it. Which again, it was a really poor example, and it was filled with more confusion than anything. Because I had done it so few times, I thought it was going to be easier than it was. So again, I will be talking about that in a future episode, when it's actually more opportune. Now, I did pick up a contract to transmit data from space around the moon, so that's what I did, and I got Bill to grab all of the science he had collected. And of course, we're just going to leave that thing in Munar orbit. Maybe we'll deorbit it some other time, maybe we won't. But I'm creating a node on the inside of the moon, and I'm just having it burn towards Kerbin so that I can make my periapsis fall back into Kerbin's atmosphere, which is again me just messing with the node until it happens. And once I get my periapsis acceptable, of course, I wait until the node, then I burn the node, and we bring Bob back, because of course we do have plenty of fuel to bring this thing back. Now, the reason I'm burning on the inside of the moon is because when you're on the inside of the moon, you're moving in the direction that you need to be moving to go back to Kerbin. So if my orbit was reversed around the moon, I would have burned on the outside of the moon, as to say that I was still moving in the same direction to go back to Kerbin. Because when you're on the moon, if you look at Kerbin, you always want to burn to the left. Because burning to the left is the opposite of the orbit of the moon. So when you come from the moon, burning to the left starts bringing your periapsis down, whereas burning to the right would bring your periapsis up. So if you had planned to escape Kerbin, you'd burn to the right of the moon. Of course, if you were looking at Kerbin from the moon. That's pretty hard to explain without actually having the visual there, but I'm sure I'll discuss it some other time. Anyhow, a standard deorbiting of this craft, with of course a parachute, so Bob will survive this time. And already I can feel the science that we're about to gain from this, and it's a lot. Now we land just on the shores of Kerbin, where we gently touch down into the water and recover this thing. Well, holy cow, I was not in any way expecting that much science. I honestly was thinking that we were going to get maybe 600-700, but to get 1,240 science from that one trip to the moon, not even min-miss, and we got that much. That is just proof on how good a scientist really is. Wow, that's really impressive. That is very, very nice. That is a lot of science, and that's really going to kickstart us into being able to do much, much more for this career. Now, of course, it's not going to unlock everything for us, but it is going to unlock a ton of stuff. And Bob is now level 2. I'm actually curious because I don't know what a level 2 scientist gets. Apparently 10% more vessel and part recovery bonuses. Alright then. That should be fine. We still only have Bob as a scientist, so I think while I'm here I might purchase another scientist. And there's only one scientist, which is Stelina. We'll purchase Stelina so that we can get access to actually using the science, the large science processing bay. Since you need two engineers, or not two, you need at least one scientist in it, but I like to put two in just to make it process faster. But 1,300 science. Let's spend this. Now, of course, I immediately am going to want the main sail engine, as well as the twin bore engine, because they're going to be very helpful with launching some of these heavier crafts, as well as wanting these nice smaller parts for probes, because it is very nice to be able to use this fuel tank with this little tiny engine and get thousands of Delta V for literally just those two parts. Big orange tank along with monopropellant. Actually, I think I don't need to pick through. I literally believe I can almost buy all these. So we're going to want better landing legs as well as these drogue parachutes, which are going to give us ability to slow down in higher atmosphere a little more efficiently. For things like Duna, they're particularly useful since Duna's atmosphere is so light, you kind of want to have parachutes really high up to start slowing down, since you don't accidentally want to crash. Even then with Duna, it's sometimes a good idea to also bring a thruster to help you land. Now along with that, we are going to grab the better electricity generation. And, oh yeah, we can get a 300 science. Now I have to pick which 300 tier science do I want, since I had been purchasing all the 160 tier sciences before I actually looked at these next tier ones. Now, I really do want the nuclear engines, however, I don't like the change that occurred to them necessarily. I preferred it when they used liquid fuel and oxidizer, now they only use liquid fuel as of 1.0. So I don't particularly care for that. I wish they kind of still use liquid fuel and oxidizer. but them only using liquid fuel, I think they're still about as efficient. So I suppose we could set up some survey scanning modules as to prepare for actually getting the mining resources, since I believe after a single trip to Minmus and doing just like what we did on the moon where we gathered tons of science, a trip to Minmus doing that, we will have enough science to actually grab this. So we might want to grab the planetary scanners as to start setting up for that. Or, because we're going to be going to Minmus for this huge mission of science gathering, we might want to just grab another science experiment, because then that will amplify how much we get by quite a bit, because the seismic accelerometer actually is one of the higher tier experiments, which means I believe it gives you the same amount as a surface sample. I'm probably very wrong on that, but yeah, I'm still going to grab this one because I do want the science for the Minmus trip. And with 210 left, I think I am going to go with... I kind of really want some of these parts. I particularly want... where is it? I know it's in here. This one. The C7 brand adapter slanted, 2.5 to 1.25. And the reason I particularly want this part is because you can stick it on the tricouplers. So you can stick 3 of them on the tricouplers to make the 1.25 meter stack push out into 3 2.5 meter stacks, which is really good for building very large rockets, and I do like that capability. As well as we get the next size fairing, which will be helpful, I suppose. Although I don't believe we're going to be using it too much. But yeah, I do want these parts because they allow a little bit better building of rockets. And next up, I probably want command modules so that we can get some larger, basically command modules, I guess. We can get larger pods out there with more crew capacity than just one. So we got tons of science, lots of new research, and I think we have enough parts to go to Minmus and make a successful trip there. Along with, of course, we picked up 2 scientists, so now we have Bob and... I forgot her name already, Stelina. Bob and Stelina, and they will be operating a science bay for us on our Minmus landing. Because we're going to be landing on Minmus, and then we're going to have a small probe attached to that lander. And this little probe is going to have about 3,000 delta V, and it's basically just going to hop to every single biome on Minmus. And you can almost do every single biome with 3,000 delta V, and we're going to take all of the science. So if you thought we got a lot of science from the Munar trip, we're going to get even more from Minmus. So with that, we'll be wrapping up episode 8 of my mostly stock career. I thank you guys for watching. This is PTT GRW, signing out.